everyone, and welcome back to Debating Metal. I'm your host, Kenneth Dean, the Dean of Metal, along with my co-host, Chris K. This week, we're doing things a little different. Today, there's no head-to-head. There's no greatest hits or worst to first. Today, Chris and I are just going to rant about a few topics and get a few things off our chests. Well, mostly my chest, but...
I'm not getting anything off of your chest. That's weird.
Really?
With the recent announcement of Judas Priest's kind of induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, we decided to speak about a few things that sometimes spark a debate in our day-to-day conversations that we thought it would be a good idea to share.
We're also going to touch on a couple of things about the music business in general, so stick around for that as well as our big four bands who are not in the Hall of Fame. As always, tell your friends that they can listen to Debating Metal on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Okay, Chris, so we have a couple of things I want to talk about, and I know you and I have discussed these things, not necessarily in length, but what we wanted to talk about. So the first thing we're going to talk about is Judas Priest getting into the Hall of Fame, and that's the phrase we're going to use because they're in there, or they're going to be in there. It's just how it is that getting in there is what's up for debate.
So... They're being inducted in a special class, which remind me what it's called originally.
Originally, the Sidemen Award.
Sidemen, that's what it was.
Yeah.
So this was a category that was established for guys that really weren't in the spotlight, that were kind of, tertiary members of the music industry that had an impact within the industry, but not necessarily in front of a crowd.
Well, the most notable Sidemen Award recipients were the E Street Band, Bruce Springsteen's backing band.
Yeah. So, a backup band. So
Exactly.
They're basically saying that Judas Priest is a backup band.
Well, since then, they've changed the name of the category. And it's now called the Music Excellence Award. So it's technically an award. It's not even like, here, you're in the Hall of Fame type of thing. It's an award you receive. So almost like a Grammy, to in my opinion. And so, what's strange about it, and I don't know, I was just reading an article before we decided to hit record, where the guy writing the article did not know if they were being inducted with this award or if this was something that, just they're going to get their name in the Hall of Fame, blah, 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 blah. No one knows what the truth really is, other than the idiots at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
And
Randy Rhoads was the recipient of this award last year.
There were a few. There was LL Cool J, Billy Preston, Randy Rhoads. Before that, so since 2010, they've renamed it, and they've inducted Leon Russell, Cosimo Matassa, Tom Dowd, Glenn Johns, the E Street Band, Ringo Starr, Nile Rodgers, and the other guys that I mentioned.
So Tom Dowd and Glenn Johns. Okay. Tom Dowd was, and I actually met Tom once. He came into my record store that I was working at when I worked at Specs Music in Florida, in Miami, across from the University of Miami, store number 1, this is what it was. He came in one night, and I think it was like a Friday, and he goes, "Where's your Leonard Skinner section?" And I'm like, "Over here." And he's like, "You see that name on the back there?" I'm like, "Yeah, Tom Dowd." And he's like, "That's me." I'm like, thinking to myself, do you do that at every store you go to? Like, who does that?
I mean, if you're Tom Dowd, why not?
I guess, it was just really weird to me. Like, you just walk into a store. I'm like, I've met other people. I met Andre Dawson, the baseball player. He doesn't go around saying, look at my baseball card. This is me. But
it would be funny if he did.
So, Tom goes in there and he's like, this is me. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And he goes, yeah. He starts going off on his career. Now, Glenn Johns, I don't know if you know who he is, but he, I don't know if he engineered I know he engineered, excuse me. I don't know if he helped produce, but because I know his name doesn't show up as a producer, but he engineered Led Zeppelin throughout the 70s.
Led Zeppelin, The Who, Eagles, etc. Yeah.
So his name, I've heard his name bounce around before, but Tom Dowd is the more famous one there. It's just one of those things is like, so the Music Excellence Award, you gave it to two producers. You give it to, Nile Rodgers is a producer too, but he's also an artist. E Street Band, backup band. I'm not trying to downgrade what they are because they're a very good band, and they're Bruce's personal band. So essentially, it's Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, but their name didn't appear on the albums. On the front of the albums, I think maybe once or something like that. So it's kind of weird. But anyway, the point being is the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is a freaking joke. I don't know how you feel about them. I do, but
I mean, as a metal fan, it's really hard to have much respect for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I mean, there's no doubt there's a lot of people in the Hall of Fame that deserve to be there. And there's no taking away from a lot of the artists that are there, whether they're multi-platinum artists or gold artists or never, even really sold records per se. The thing that bothers me is there's so much disrespect and hate for metal within the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. So you can love all the other genres and appreciate them and, want to bring in like Dolly Parton, who was very respectful, tried to bow out of it. I can understand her thought process there, but I can also respect her as a musician, and yeah, maybe she should belong in there as well. But why is metal so overlooked and really just despised by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?
It's one of those things for me where I think, you obviously have these critics and writers, people who write for like Rolling Stone and Spin Magazine and things like that. And they basically think their shit doesn't stink. They basically think that their opinion about music is the best. I mean, it's like, a rich guy who looks down upon a person who drives a Toyota Camry. I drive a Ferrari, I drive a Rolls Royce, you drive a Toyota, and that's just bullshit. We're all humans. Okay. So we all like the music that we like. That doesn't take away from the music. I mean, you and I have talked about before that metal probably has the largest group of virtuoso musicians in the world, in my opinion. Now, you could sit there and say, philharmonic orchestras all over the world you have virtuoso musicians, but those guys read off the sheet of music. Try to put one of those guys in front of a concert crowd and have him shred his violin without looking at the sheet music. Let's see if he could do it. I mean, these guys who play metal, for the most part, is rock and roll in general, but a lot of metal, to me, are just amazing musicians, and they don't get the due that they deserve.
It reminds me a lot of critics and how much hate they had for like horror movies, but horror movies were some of the big, summer cash cows. They put out these like Freddy and Jason and stuff like that, right? And they would come out and they would just be utterly dismissed as a genre, yet they're the ones making money.
Right.
And it's the same thing. Like the metal community has been stalwarts, and during the 80s that was the pop genre. And even then, like they didn't want to admit it. It's like it's not classy enough.
Exactly. I mean, it's just like, they look at him like at specifically metal musicians, hard rock musicians. They look at them like they're a bunch of scumbags, and that's just a messed up idea and concept. You were talking about the movies, and how these summer blockbusters in a lot of cases were like the Freddys and the Jasons. I remember I used to, on Fridays when movies would come out, I would read the Miami Herald back when reading a newspaper was a thing, and they had this. I can't remember the guy's name. If I'm not mistaken, he's since passed away. He was a critic. I think his last name was Cosford. He was a film critic, and I mean, if he gave a film 2.5 stars, you could bank on that movie being a blockbuster. Now, mind you, we're talking out of 4 stars. The reason why is because he didn't give movies 4 stars. He didn't give movies 3 stars, but usually the movie that ended up getting 2.5 stars was just going to be the movie that everyone loved. Now, I do know that he did give a few movies over time, and I've read a couple of them, 4 stars. He gave, I recall 2 specifically. One of them was My Own Private Idaho. I can't remember who the main star was in that movie, but I know Anthony Kiedis from Red Hot Chili Peppers was in that movie. And the other movie was Drugstore Cowboy that starred Matt Dillon.
My Own Private Idaho was River Phoenix and Keanu Reeves.
Right, but I believe Kiedis was in that movie. That's the only reason why I remember that.
Oh, okay.
He was part of that group. It didn't necessarily star him, but he was part of that group in that movie. And the other one was Drugstore Cowboy with Matt Dillon. He gave Drugstore Cowboy 4 stars. I said, I got to see this. I mean, Matt Dillon, he's a good actor. Let me check this out. If I don't want to say that the movie was a piece of crap, because it wasn't a piece of crap, but it was one of those artsy fartsy movies that, they didn't glamorize drug use. They didn't glamorize the pain. My Own Private Idaho was a much better movie in that regards. But Drugstore Cowboy just, to me, was just one of those art films made by a director that wanted to show off all these different kinds of skills that he had. That's the way I look at it. And no offense to anyone who out there who likes Drugstore Cowboys, not every movie is for every person. I just did not think it was worth the 4 stars that Cosford gave it, because it was just absolutely the best movie he had seen in ages. So going back to music, this is the same thing. You get these critics that love certain kinds of music. They love the and I don't want to downgrade any of the musicians that I'm going to say right now, but they love the people like Patti Smith. They love people like Bruce Springsteen. It's just that, I don't know, the Patti Smith, the kind of the alternative kind of musicians out there that just, they don't necessarily sell millions and millions of copies of albums, but the artsy fartsy people like them.
Yeah, they like to pick these certain artists that they can say, oh, they have a deeper message, and and that's really what it is. They just want to all stand in a circle and circle jerk each other, but it's just. There's so much talent in the metal community that's overlooked, and it's sad.
I mean, it's absolutely sad and the overlooking of those artists. I mean, I don't want to downgrade the fact that Guns N' Roses is in the Hall of Fame, but quite honestly, I don't feel that they deserved to be in the Hall of Fame first ballot off of basically the back of one album. Yes, they released 3 studio albums. They released 1 EP, they released 2 EPs, of which the same music was on both EPs, just so you know. And then they released the covers album. And they've since have released Chinese Democracy at that point. But the bottom line is that they got into the Hall of Fame on the strength of one album, their debut album. Now, mind you, a great album. Not putting anything down about Appetite for Destruction. It's a great album, one of my favorite.
Then Sex Pistols.
Same thing.
They have one album.
Exactly. One album.
And,
That's all they made.
like, I mean, I get the concept of they are, they represent rock, the mindset of rock and roll, or, whatever bullshit thing that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame says. But there are multi-platinum artists that are not in the Hall of Fame. I mean,
you mentioned the Sex Pistols, and that's really cool because here's the thing. I listened to part of that album the other day for the first time. Now, mind you, I've heard Anarchy in the UK. I've heard Holiday in the Sun, and I've heard God Save the Queen. I personally don't understand what the big deal is about those songs. There's nothing special about those songs. The recording of it sucked. It sounded muffled.
Realistically, It's less about the actual music and more about the attitude and the time period, etc. Right?
Okay.
Because punk music was a rebellion. So it's a documentation of that attitude. So I get it. I get it that they were very influential, and that's why they're in the Hall of Fame. But you can't give me that they deserve to be in the Hall of Fame, and so many of our metal favorites are not.
Oh, absolutely
why
not.
Why is Motorhead not in the Hall of Fame, yet we have the Sex Pistols?
And the funny thing is as shitty as the Motorhead made their recording sound, they still sounded better than that album.
Absolutely.
I listened to it and I'm like, what's the big deal? I can understand. I mean, maybe what came out in 1977. I mean, punk existed. I just don't understand what the big deal is. Was it the first one to basically, tell the government to F off? No. I don't get it. And I never got it. And I maybe I'm missing something along the way, but it didn't make any sense to me. And the whole thing with Guns N' Roses, it's like, why did they go in first? And it took Deep Purple ages, a couple of decades literally to get in. And it took so long that John Lord ended up passing away before he could get in. Okay. I mean, it made no sense whatsoever. Deep Purple, if you want to talk about influential, Deep Purple, one song is one of the most influential songs ever written. And it's and for them to sit there and say, or every year pass on them because, for whatever reason, they weren't media darlings, or Richie Blackmore must have told someone to fuck off somewhere along the line. It didn't make any sense, because if you want to talk about influential, that song, Smoke in the Water, the first few chords is one of the most influential songs ever. To millions and millions and millions of guitar players out there,
You're telling me, look, no disrespect to Jackson Browne, but you're telling me Jackson Browne should be in the Hall of Fame before Deep Purple.
I'm not telling you that. But, right, exactly. I get your point. It is absolutely stupid, clueless. I listened to Eddie Trunk rant about it the other day, and he said that they were clueless.
So Deep Purple sold 100 million albums so far, and Jackson Browne has sold 18 million. And it took how much longer for Deep Purple to get in?
I mean, what did they get into in the late 2000s? They got in.
Deep Purple got in 2016.
2016.
So past the 2000s. Yeah.
And their first album was in 1967, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. So they're eligible 25 years after the first album, which meant that it was in the early 90s that they were eligible.
Mm-hmm.
And, and what year did Jackson Browne get in?
2004.
2004. So it took him a while. I get that. But
he's only sold 18 million albums.
Yeah, no, that I understand. I mean, where is his influence to me? I don't know. I'm aware of who he is. I'm aware that he's done production as well as being an artist.
country rock, folk rock. He worked a little bit with the Eagles. You know, he's had several albums. He's written songs for other people. He's a charitable individual.
He's an activist, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And that's the big thing, is that he's an activist. And I can tell you that's probably why he got in that.
Exactly. You know? Okay. He's an activist. So are Rage Against the Machine.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that Rage Against the Machine is a talk for another time. You know, it's just unbelievable how disrespected hard rock and heavy metal are by the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And not just them, but the Grammys too. The Grammys are clueless.
Oh, you know? Yeah, that's a whole nother thing. The Grammys, man, like, yeah, you have some of them get nominated, but it's almost just like a give me, like, oh, you got nominated, so that's good enough.
Well, and even then,
there's been many times they should have won.
Yeah, but even then, like, for instance, I mean, who just got in right now? Who just got the Grammy? Dream Theater. Dream Theater just got a Grammy for a song apparently that's like 9 minutes long, and it's got a bajillion, key changes and time changes and all this stuff, and it's in a different time signature, all sorts of different shit. Okay, I guarantee you, just like Eddie said, Eddie Trunk, that the people who voted for him did not listen to the song.
No,
and if they did, they had no understanding. Because if they would have listened to the song, they probably would have picked something else because they would have like, what the hell is this? But they gave it to Dream Theater because they probably heard the name before. And it quite honestly, it's the same reason when Metallica lost for the song One in 1989, they won the next year for a cover song. I believe that's when they won for Stone Cold Crazy for their cover of Queen, because they came out on that Rubaiyat tribute album, and so they lost to Jethro Tull, who's not a metal band. They win for a cover song, and then I think they win for the next 3 years because, of course, Enter Sandman and the Black Album just blew the doors off of everything. So they were now the media darlings of the world, And it's funny.
Not taking nothing away from Metallica, but at the same time, part of that, the reason they won was because they were media darlings. Yeah. Because it was good publicity.
Exactly. And I take nothing away from that. They were. But here's the funny thing. And I forgot what documentary I was watching recently. And when that whole, I forgot what it was, but that whole time period when they released the Black Album and they got invited to the Queen tribute, and they got to play 3 songs, and then James got to play with Tony Iommi and Brian May and the rest of Queen on stage to do Stone Cold Crazy, basically. They walked into this place and they thought that they were like 4 of the biggest scumbags, to walk in there, and like, why are we here? Why are they're inviting us? Do they know who we are? Do they know that we're a bunch of punks from LA and San Francisco? Why are we being invited to this? This is Lars's supposed thought process, right? And I get it, because at that time they technically were nobodies in the eyes of the world, but they got invited, and then all of a sudden from there the train just kept on going. So they get, their first year of eligibility, they get into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Okay, I get it. But if I'm not mistaken, Black Sabbath took a while to get in. They didn't get in on first shot.
I mean, it's nice to be recognized for something like that, but at the same time, I wouldn't give 2 shits if I was in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame if I was a metal artist, to be honest. Until they figure out how to start showing people some respect, I wouldn't give a crap.
I mean, you feel that finally someone has acknowledged you, and I get that. Like,
I mean, look, Bruce Dickinson says, like, all I need is the acknowledgement of the fans, and that's the way to look at it. Because these people are not fans, and these people are just music industry what's the word? Rats?
Snobs.
Yeah.
No, I mean, it is, we could go on for hours about this, and continue to talk about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and how much I can't stand them, and the fact that they keep disrespecting my boys out there in Metal Land. But, you're never going to see Poison in there. You're never going to see a Motley Crue. You're never going to see Cinderella or Warrant, Dokken or LA Guns. You're never going to see any bands like that. The closest thing is Guns N' Roses. Basically, Guns N' Roses went in for all those bands. And
yeah, I can see that.
Exactly. So that, you should be happy with that. That's basically what they're saying.
Yeah, and I kind of feel the same way. Metallica's in there for the thrash bands, the heavier metal bands. Judas Priest is getting in a
for
shitty
all the mainstream
way.
Yeah, no, Judas Priest is getting in the worst way possible. Metallica got inducted, okay? Kiss got inducted. Judas Priest, they're technically quote unquote getting inducted. Yeah, Def Leppard got inducted, but they're getting presented with an award, a thank you for your musicianship.
A participation trophy.
A participation trophy, if you will. And you know what? Basically, if I'm Rob, fuck the suit. I'm going to go in there in a metal-studded tuxedo, leather, and dragging chains behind me, and just give like one giant wail to everybody, because he's just got to show it the way that he represents it every day.
I agree.
So
go dressed as Rob Halford.
Exactly. Well,
be himself.
Have you seen him dress sometimes? You might not want him to dress that way.
Assless chaps and everything.
and the high heels. The high stilettos. All right. So, like I said, we could keep talking about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and it'll be hours. But let's talk about a couple of other things that kind of piqued my interest. A month ago, and you and I haven't talked about this part of it too much. A month ago was Record Store Day, or thereabouts. And my beef with Record Store Day, I celebrate it. I have no problem with it per se. But what I began to realize is, it especially hit me with Kirk Hammett's solo EP release. Kirk Hammett released it on vinyl, and he released it on CD at the same time. And with the vinyl release came the download card with that. Now, here's my beef with Record Store Day. Record Store Day is called Record Store Day because the stores are nicknamed record stores. They're actually music stores, music media stores, if you will. Okay, but the old school label has always been record store. I'm going to go to my I'm going to the record store. I want to go get something to listen to. I want to go buy something. But you didn't necessarily go to the record store just for records. They had tapes and they had CDs. CDs, obviously, from the mid 80s on. And then CDs became the number one format for listening to music in the 90s. I am a child of both records, and then when CDs came about, I adopted CDs. I have over 2,000 CDs sitting behind my back right now, and I have about, let me say, 500 records. I think maybe less, between 3 and 5. And when I started collecting CDs or buying CDs, I bought the CDs because I'm like, these sound way better than records, and they're portable, and I could put them in my car without having to re-record an album. When I was a kid, I used to ride around with a record, and it was just flopping all over. The funny thing about that is, I saw a picture. Some company invented a record player to go in a car.
Oh, really?
Did not work very well.
I imagine not.
But it had one of those things where it clamped down on the record, but it was just too big.
Yeah.
I mean, try putting that shit in your dashboard. or even better, try getting the one that, like the removable cassette deck so you don't get it stolen.
You take it with
you. So anyway, my beef with Record Store Day is, why is it about vinyl and vinyl only? I don't get that. And I know you are not a big, you at one point at some time gave up all your hard media. Okay.
I did. I was very broke and needed the money, and I sold every CD I owned, with a few exceptions. I still have some really sentimental ones, but
you could have just kept the CDs and gone straight to prostitution.
No, I could have kept the CDs and divorced the wife earlier. Probably would have saved me a lot of mental stress, but
grief, time, and money.
Yeah, right. So yeah, I gave up pretty much all of my physical media. Went mostly digital. I would say almost 100% digital. I grew up listening to mostly cassette tapes, though. When I was a kid, because they were portable, and we didn't have the CDs, or we didn't have really a lot of money for CDs. My parents didn't adopt that format until, I would say, the 2000s.
Oh wow!
So most of what I listened to, my sister was the first one to buy a CD player, and I think the first CD she bought was the Simpsons Soundtrack. I can't remember which one, but it was with the old stuff from like the first few seasons, and that was the first CD we had in the house.
Wow. I mean, I think I've mentioned it before. My first CDs were AC/DC's Back in Black, Highway to Hell, Queensryche's The Warning, and Guns N' Roses' Lies, because it just came out.
So what's the first metal album you owned? Just aside.
If you want to put it like that, I mean, I would consider Kiss Alive 2 the first metal album I owned.
Okay. I want to say my first one was Silverchair Frog Stomp.
Ooh,
not really metal, but like hard rock,
Yeah. Now, when it came to records, the first few were all Kiss. I had a bunch of Kiss records before I had any other rock metal albums. Then when MTV came around and things started to explode, I would say the first one after that would probably be Back in Black. Because I know I bought that because I saw the movie Let There Be Rock, and I went to AC/DC, the AC/DC bin in the record store right across from the movie theater back in Yonkers, and they had Back in Black. And I believe that's the same record store that I bought Van Halen 2 at, which was the first Van Halen. And I probably bought Screaming for Vengeance from there for Judas Priest. And I believe it was a record store up the street, which was a head shop back in the day, where you can get your marijuana paraphernalia and your Grateful Dead toys. and a bunch of T-shirts and glowing, what do they call those? Not glow in the dark, but those the blacklight posters.
Nice.
And they also had records in the middle of the thing so that they could be a legitimate business. I think that's where I got Iron Maiden's Number of the Beast from. There was two stores in where I grew up that were not too far from each other that sold records. Those are probably my first few albums that I got, all in the 82 era or year. I mean, I know Back in Black came out in 80, Van Halen 2 came out in 79, but 82 is when I started getting into that stuff, and those were the ones that I bought. So,
gotcha.
so my beef is, with this resurgence of vinyl, and now CDs are making a comeback, okay? My problem with Record Store Day is that you have these limited edition records that come out. This is almost equivalent to standing in line at Ticketmaster on a Saturday morning waiting for the concert to go, and then the line is bombarded with scalpers. Now we're getting scalpers left and right, if you want to call them that, trying to buy the one album that is going to be the most prestigious for Record Store Day. And this year's, for 2022, was Taylor Swift's 7-inch single. It was being sold for $500. Same day. Yeah, $500. $500 same day. It was on eBay.
Oh, on eBay. I thought you meant in the record store.
No. Not the record store was like $10, $15, something like 15, 20. I don't know. Whatever it was.
That's a problem I have with a lot of media and just things in general. People will buy all this stuff up and then just immediately go list it on eBay, and that's their way of making money, but it ruins it for the fan base.
No, absolutely.
It really makes it hard to be a fan of a lot of things right now because of the scalping. And the scalping has become so ridiculous.
I mean, I've found something. I want to get the live release of, well, it's a live album. It was from Rage Against the Machine, live in Mexico City, that came out 2 record store days ago, I think it was. It was last year. I'm sorry, in 2021. And I missed that day because I was coming back from Miami, and I did not get to the store in time. So now I looked it up on eBay, and someone wants $40 for it. You know what? I could live with $40. It's not that bad. It was probably a $30 to $35 album to begin with, maybe even $40 because it's a double live album. But like the Ozzy Live, I think the cheapest I ever saw, it was a live recording, Randy Rhoads era. Same tour as the album that Tribute is recorded from. And it's just a different sound, but it was called Ozzy Live, has Randy on it. And I see it now for like $100. I mean, it's kind of disappointing because I don't really feel like spending $100 on something that was, it's about 10 years old now. The recording itself obviously is 40 years old. But still, just disappointing that you have to go through those hoops to try and get something that you like.
Absolutely.
So my beef with Record Store Day is really, why is it just about the records? It really should be released if they're going to do vinyl. They should put it on CD. I don't see what the problem is. CD is probably cheaper to reproduce. Okay, you don't necessarily, you can still keep it to a limited edition, I know some of these Record Store Day releases are 2,000, 4,000, 5,000, copies. Some of them are basically Record Store Day first, and then the release becomes nationwide. But, like Kirk Hammett's was just released on Record Store Day. It had a certain amount of vinyl, a certain amount of CDs. It's probably, going to be a regular CD, but it's just those kinds of things annoy me about these this day, because you have these great releases that, yeah, they're limited. I get it, but I really think they should release it on CD for those people who prefer it on CD. And on top of that, and I've told you this, they really need to freaking put download cards to download the MP3s on these records. If they want records to sell regularly and sell hot, put the fucking download card on there. There was not a question. I knew it was going to be in Kirk Hammett's. The other ones, none of them had it. I bought 5 records that day. Nobody had it. So that's my beef. I know you don't go record collecting as much as I do.
No, but I collect my own things. I'm a huge comic book collector, and it's the same thing. I watch a YouTube channel that I'm a big fan of, that it's called Toy Galaxy, and they talk about a lot of 80s stuff, stuff that I grew up with, mostly like TV shows and toy lines that went along with them. It's very nostalgic, right? And the thing he says at the end is, if you see 2 on the shelf, leave 1 for the next collector. And I agree with that mentality, because I'm a conscientious person. I care about other people. And sometimes that sucks because it's not really returned by a lot of people, to be honest. But yeah, if you are one of those people and you see 2 on the shelf, the world would be a better place if you left one for the next collector.
Absolutely, especially if you know it's limited edition. It's like, come on, man. You don't have to go out there. That's why on Record Store Day, they limit you to one.
And it should be that way.
You can't get, I can't remember. Oh, the Alice in Chains. You know what? If you can go to Record Store Day and buy your one copy, and if it is there the next time you go back to the record store after Record Store Day, by all means, get as many as you want. But if it's not there, it's not there for a reason. It's collectible. So, I got my Alice in Chains EP, but I know if I go back there, there's still something. This was a whole shitload of Alice in Chains EPs that day, and I don't think it was necessarily.
That's the thing. Like if it's been a few weeks,
right,
and nobody's come by and bought them, and you really want to buy them to resell them, fine, whatever. But the scalping's gotten so bad that it's happening before it even meets street date. So some of this stuff is making it onto eBay before it's even actually out there for the regular public to consume it.
Well, the thing about that too, for me, like I think what happens there is there's somebody knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, right?
Exactly.
Get that for me. But when you see the release or you see the picture on eBay, they don't have it. They're waiting for that guy to get it.
For sure. But they've had their guy,
right? They've had their guy,
secure them somehow.
Exactly. Some guy who works at the record store, some guy who works at the distributor.
But I'm talking, it's even going further than that with other stuff, that it's actually getting out there before street dates are actually hit. And that's the problem that I'm seeing. It's getting worse and worse.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that. And again, I love Record Store Day. I love the concept, the idea, the fact that many, many, many artists are behind it. But I think that it needs to have a little bit more, the word is not accessibility per se, but I just think there needs to be more openness to releasing stuff on CD. There's a few artists here and there that do that. But I really think even the limited edition stuff, I think some of that stuff should be released on CD, so that people who prefer that format can still get something limited, but it's not necessarily the vinyl. Like I'm sure there's people who don't participate in Record Store Day because they can't get it on CD. They don't want to pay for the vinyl because they don't listen to vinyl, and that's a shame because they're just going to probably rip it from somewhere, get some torrent and download it illegally. And, but they would probably gladly pay for it if it was available on Record Store Day in a CD.
Yeah.
Okay. So, we talked about that. So the last thing that I really wanted to talk about today, and unless you have something else you want to get off your chest, is partially the music business. I read this headline the other day from Anvil talking about the fact that they got fucked by the music business. And, you and I have had discussions over and over again about the glam metal bands that got screwed when grunge became big. And we kind of referenced it on the Poison versus Warrant episode we did recently. The whole thing with Anvil getting fucked by the music business, because remember, like they said, they were on tour, they were on top of the world, they were opening for this band, they were opening for that band, and then, their album is quote unquote selling, and then all of a sudden, nothing. They were off the tour, they were dropped by the label, and there was no support. I don't have a problem believing that. I have a problem with, I guess, how it happened, per se. Like when you see the documentary, they tell you the same thing. We were on top of the world and then we weren't. But why? How come all of a sudden there was no support for Anvil? Okay, and this happens to lots of bands. What happened? Why are these bands that you heard at one point so great? Where did the disintegration come from? That's the question. That's my rant about this. Why did Anvil get fucked? Did somebody sit there and say, you know what? I want to fuck Anvil? Is that the reason? Or was it, some underlying problem with the record company? Did they sign with the wrong record company? I mean,
part of it was, and then part of it was they disappeared because the 90s hit. I mean, things drastically changed. And there was no support from the record companies. There was no support from MTV because the new sensation was grunge. So it didn't matter if the music was really good or not. A lot of times in the 80s, as long as there was one or two good songs per album, there was enough trend with metal at the time that a lot of those bands could make it. But if they didn't have consistently good music across the board on their records, then they weren't going to survive through that time period. And we've talked about that multiple times with multiple bands. And Anvil, they had some good stuff at the beginning, but when the 1990s hit, they didn't.
Yeah, but look, basically Anvil's career was over after their third album. Okay? They came out in 1981 with their first album, Hard and Heavy, 82, Metal on Metal, and 83, Forged in Fire. Then there was a 4-year break, and that is where Anvil went downhill.
That hurt them.
Yeah, absolutely that hurt them. They ended up signing with Metal Blade for 2 albums, came out in 87 and 88, Strength of Steel, Pound for Pound. Quite honestly, I remember the Anvil being real popular in the early 80s. I was reading all the magazines. I was seeing their name everywhere. And then they disappeared for 4 years. And absolutely that hurt them. Okay? And so I'm reading here, in 83, they were managed by David Krebs and his assistant Paul O'Neill. They signed a managing contract with Anvil, convinced Anvil to release the band from its contract, or Attic Records to release the band from its contract so the band could be put on a major label. However, after initial interest, Krebs eventually stopped returning phone calls and did not get the band on a major label recording contract. He released the band in mid-1986. So, you have the biggest problem with these small little labels like Attic. Let's go all the way back to Gull with Judas Priest.
Oof.
Okay.
Yeah, that's an awful story.
Exactly. And it's very similar. Basically, they will not, because they know what they're sitting on, they will not release the bands. Now, in the case of Attic, I don't know what kind of contract Anvil had with Attic, but they did 3 albums with them. And so at some point, David Krebs was trying to get him off of Attic so that they could sign him to a major label. If David Krebs, who was Aerosmith's manager, couldn't get him off of Attic without going through a whole legal problem, which is probably the reason why he dropped them a couple years later, I'm pretty sure they were not going to get out of any loophole that Attic was going to give them. And that's basically why they got screwed. So they ended up getting, they had to wait all the way to 1987, 4 years. In the 80s, 4 years was a death sentence. You were done if you did not have your name in the public eye year in and year out through the 80s. That's just the way it was. Amazing enough that Metallica was able to spread it to 2 years. In the 80s, but they were on word of mouth until the video for One. So Anvil's problem was management and a label that would not let them go. Other bands, we Judas Priest, I can't remember what Rob said in the book, but they got out of their contract with Gull and they ended up signing with Sony. But they have yet to this day ever been able to get a hand on the masters for Sad Wings of Destiny and Rock'n'Rolla. And that company, whoever is in control of the masters, keeps putting out every other year regurgitating some remastered version. They've been part of Record Store Day for the last 3 years. Released Sad Wings of Destiny. I mean, I bought it. The Sad Wings of Destiny, reissue that they did was fabulous. I mean, I'm not taking anything away from that one. That was awesome. They, embossed album cover, remastered. Sounds great.
But they're doing vinyl. Exactly that. It's just they're taking advantage of the fans.
Yeah. Oh no,
by
absolutely.
Continuing to re-release this stuff, and it should belong to the artist, but the law is the law,
right? And I don't know if Judas Priest is making any money on those. I would think they get something for it, but who knows? But like this year, I believe it was the Best of Judas Priest that was re-released again on Record Store Day format, or a vinyl for that matter. So it's just kind of weird with Gull. But, there's obviously countless stories of countless amount of artists that get screwed by their record companies. They get screwed by their management companies and they disappear. And then all of a sudden, a few years later, you hear about them again. And it's like, what happened? You were going to be big. You were going to be a contender. What happened? And is it the music business that screws you? Or is it your bad decision making?
I mean, it's probably a little bit of both, but I think in a lot of ways, it is a lot of times the music industry. Like knowing about the band Vixen. Vixen's an all-girls metal band, and they really struggled to get into the industry in the first place because a lot of the record companies would hear them, and they'd be like, "Oh, we already have a girl band signed, so we don't need another one." That sucks because they were really in their prime at the very beginning of their career before they kind of got warped by what the company who was their record company for the first album.
I believe it was MCA.
So Vixen.
And that's the other thing too. The record company that you end up signing with has a tremendous amount of influence as far as how they can promote your band, how they can record your album. And when I say influence, if they're stupid and they don't have a marketing team that knows what to deal with, who to contact in that particular arena of music when it comes to hard rock or heavy metal, if they don't have any contacts and all they know are the Frank Sinatra contacts, your album's dead in the water.
For sure.
You're not going to get... I'm sorry.
So it was Manhattan was their record company. And so they bring on... that because they felt like they needed other songs to be written, they bring on Richard Marx, who is a huge metal guy, right? He writes lots of metal songs. He writes Edge of a Broken Heart. Yeah, sure, it's a big hit, but it doesn't represent Vixen. There's 4 or 5 songs that were not written by the band. They were written by other guys, and I do mean men, that were supposed to be the singles. When you actually listen to that first album, the songs that you really enjoy listening to are the ones written by the band.
I gotta say, the dude's name Fee Waybill is pretty freaking weird and cool at the same time. Fee. Well, if your name was John Waldo, I'd change my name to Fee too. But Fee Waybill is the singer for the Tubes, and he helped write Edge of a Broken Heart with Richard Marx. But yes, I completely agree with you when it comes to, you have a band and then basically they were treated very similarly to how they would treat artists from the 50s. Like they had a good look, they had a good voice. We're going to give you a song. You're going to do this, and it was basically, you're going to do this. And management go, come on, hey, you're going to do this. We're going to make lots of money, blah, blah, blah.
Exactly. Like what we talked about with Warrant.
Right. Exactly.
Warrant, your guitarist isn't really what we want. So we're going to bring in a guy to play all the solos. And then we're also going to make your album a different title because we don't have confidence in your leadoff single. So write this, something that's going to be a big anthem.
The music business has chewed up and swallowed countless artists, and the ones that make it, it's amazing. It's obviously a very small percentage. I compare things. Let's put it this way: Metallica. Okay, Metallica was driven by Lars Ulrich. Lars was driven to make it and succeed. Okay, the minute that he signed with Megaforce, they were Megaforce's first band. They were Megaforce's second release. Okay, and as soon as they got to New York, the first thing that after waking up in Johnny Z's house, he basically says to himself, "I need a new manager. This guy's not gonna bring us over the top." And this is from a kid who basically hasn't had his first album released yet, but he already knows that it's not going to be what he needs in the end. They ended up signing with Q Prime Management, which they are still with today. And Q Prime, has had some really large acts. And the guys from Q Prime, Peter Mensch and I think it was Dave, so I can't remember. They, at one point, were managing AC/DC when they were part of Lieber and Krebs in the late 70s. And AC/DC wasn't happy with those guys. I think they fired Peter Mensch. So it's weird how the circle of management life works. But, Q Prime had Queensryche. They've had Dokken. I believe they had Def Leppard. I'm not sure. And Metallica. Metallica's been with them since 1983, I think, 84. So that's their number one band, obviously. You can tell something from a good management company to these smaller guys who just sit there and they basically blow smoke up your ass and treat bands like Anvil and Vixen basically like, disposable humans.
Oh, yeah. It's tough because I've been watching a lot of stuff about different bands that I'm not super familiar with and kind of getting to learn more about, the wider stretch of metal. And even within the metal world, sometimes other people, like, let me give you an example. There's Keel, the band, Ron Keel's project, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So they have their first album, Lay Down the Law. It's not bad. It's a glam metal album. Kind of high energy, raw sounding. And then they go into their second album and Gene Simmons produces it. Well, Gene Simmons says, "Hey, I have all these leftover songs from our album that didn't make the cut. Why don't you put them on your album?"
Well,
that's garbage.
Well, the other thing too about that, and yes, I agree with you that that's garbage, but Keel, in that particular case, they're signed to Shrapnel Records with Lay Down the Law. They get signed to a major label of MCA, and they're given Gene Simmons as their producer. The problem was that they as soon as they got signed to MCA says, well, "Go in the studio." Well, shit, they didn't have any songs. They only literally had 3 songs written. And so that's a huge part of the reason why they ended up going with those Gene Simmons songs, because they had nothing written. Now, could they have written or should they have written more?
He pushed them on them too.
Right. That I'm pretty sure that was it, to be that way he can make more money.
Exactly.
That's
he
Gene
gets the
Simmons.
songwriting credit.
Exactly. So, it's one of those things where they were caught with their pants down with not having backup songs. And then on top of that, you get this guy who's very pushy. We all know how Gene is, and a label saying you need an album, in the next 6 weeks. Uh-oh. So, yeah, Keel was one of those people that could have easily have been, chewed up and spit out, and it took him a while.
So part of it is a lot of luck, and it's dedication by the members of the band too. So if you have a lineup that they're in tough times and they're not making a lot of money, but the music's good, some of those guys may not stick around because they're not making the money they need to just live every day. Right. So a lot of times you'd see musicians that were very good. You'd say, "What happened to that guitarist? He was awesome," and it just the lifestyle didn't work for him, or just the money he was making didn't work for him. It's a lot of luck. It's timing. It's does this work for you? There's so many things, so many factors of why some bands make it and some bands don't. I don't think Keel didn't make it because they had some crappy songs on their second album. I think they didn't make it because they continued to have crappy songs for many albums after, and they had some good ones, but then they're just one example of these bands that are like that. Anvil's the same way. They had 3 albums that were pretty dang good. Or 2, really, because their first album, honestly, it's rough. It's got a couple good songs on it, but the first album's not that great. But they kind of hit their stride with 2 and 3, and then after that, they lost their steam. So sometimes it's just like that. You may put out one amazing album and then never do anything great after that.
Look, it's very rare that you have a band like, let's say, Armored Saint, that have been to the bottom of that shithole and have still been able to remain friends and still be able to remain a band all these years later.
Oh, absolutely. Because Armored Saint is one of those bands that they put out really good music and they've just been utterly overlooked.
Well, I mean, you and I were talking about them the other day. So you get the first album, March of the Saint, okay? And according to them, March of the Saint, the song, was supposed to be faster. So when they released their Nod to the Old School album in the 2000s, they sped up the song. I don't believe that to be absolutely true, only because, first of all, nobody was playing that fast back then. There was
some of the interviews from back then, though, he talks about what the record company made them do. Like, that's interesting because there's actually documentation of a lot of the stuff where he said, like, at the time of the releases, within the same year, he's talking about they made us do this, this, and this, and it's not really an Armored Saint thing.
Yeah, no, he did mention that. And so the first album, they had, like, their big hit was Can You Deliver? I love that song. That song is awesome, but March of the Saint was a good song, and I think the pace of it was fine back then. They just sped it up again because they said, "Oh, we always wanted to play it faster." Okay, I get you. Just like everybody says, "Oh, we always wanted to play it in D." No, you didn't. If your ass would have wanted to play it in D back in the day, you would have played it in D. Okay, but nobody was playing in D. So,
Pachelbel was.
Well, what?
Canon in D. I went real old school.
Yeah, that's real old school. But their issue was they signed with the record label that had no idea what to do with them. We have these guys that sitting there sounding. They sound great. They're a metal band. They dress like they're from the Dark Ages. And what are we supposed to do with these guys? Much like I said, if you look up the definition of heavy metal in a dictionary, you should see their faces on there because they're pure metal. So it's one of these things where it's like, what do we do with this band? Well, can't somebody call a friend and say, "Hey, man, you got this band on your on your label. How do you get them promoted?" I mean, come on, these are all people know each other. How is it that this one guy on this one label not know what to do with them?
I've said this many times that the creatives are screwed over so often by uncreative people that are just in the industry to make money, and that's understandable. Everybody wants to make money, or not everybody, but most people want to make money, and I get that, but the creatives who are actually making the material that we consume and that we love, TV shows, movies, music, etc., it's all hinging on these people that have no creative aspects in their entire life. They are worthless, and we are allowing our art to be ruined by these people.
It's absolutely true what you're saying, because you got people in charge that don't know squat about making music. They don't know squat about making a painting. They don't know squat about drawing a comic book. And all the stuff that goes behind the scenes to do those things. They don't know squat. They know promoting. Okay, promote. Stick to fucking promoting. Okay? Mm-hmm. If you know...
Promote the stuff that's good and that people want to consume, and stop giving us crap that we don't want. I mean... Because that's when it goes downhill.
Exactly. I mean, guys like John Kalodner were famous for a reason. Okay? He had an absolutely awesome ear at certain things and certain aspects of songs and the final product, because it was just that good. I mean, he's the guy who told Steven Tyler, I really think you need to change that word rape to something else. Otherwise, we're not going to get this song on the radio. And he's talking about, Janie's Got a Gun. So Steven changed the word rape to jack. So instead of saying he raped a little bitty baby, he wrote he jacked a little bitty baby. Completely changes the song to be more acceptable to the general public. And that song was huge. Okay? One of those things. He was the force behind a lot of things that went on with Whitesnake, when they were huge in the 80s. John...
Was he the one who said to change hobo?
He may have been. He may have been the one to suggest. I don't remember if he may have been the one to suggest you doing "Here I Go Again," and he may have said to change hobo. I don't remember if David ever said it was John's choice. But John Kalodner is that kind of person who would probably realize that and say, "Yeah, let's do this instead of that." It's one of those things where that's what an A&R man does for you. They're there to be the ear and the pathway from the musician to the fan. Okay,
but a good one allows an artist to still be an artist,
right?
And just says, "Hey, this might be a good decision to change."
Who's big too, really huge for Atlantic Records? Jason Flom. I'm sure you've heard the name before. Mm-hmm. Okay, Jason was really big, and he was a big metalhead, and he knew all those bands, and he's the one who's able to push certain bands and know what he had behind them and get them moving. Not everybody is going to succeed, because even though Jason or John or somebody or myself, anybody who listens to music and says, that's going to be a big song. It could be, you could be dead in the water. Just like, I love a lot of the songs that are on Waiting for the Punchline from Extreme. I've talked about it before, but that album went nowhere because it had no promotional push behind it. But there's some really good songs in there. I was asked back in 1992 by one of the buyers at Specs Music. She handed me a CD from a band called Stone Temple Pilots. No one had ever heard of this band. I had never heard of the band. And she goes, "Tell me what you think. I need to place an order for this pretty soon." Okay. Go home for the weekend, listen to it. It's an amazing album. That first album, Core, amazing. And, the first thing I hear is Dead and Bloated. Then the next thing I hear is Sex Type Thing. I mean, this album's awesome. It's got a little bit of sound almost like a little bit of Pearl Jam on it, but a little heavier. It's kind of like a mix between Pearl Jam and Soundgarden, and you throw in, it's like all the grunge wrapped up into one band. To me, that was what Stone Temple Pilots' first album was like. And I was like, I went back to her on Monday. I said, "You got to buy a shitload of this because it's going to be huge." Now, does that make me a great A&R guy? No, because obviously they got signed by someone else. But I wasn't working. I wasn't a music business person. I just worked at a record store. But she said, she comes up to me. She goes, "I know you like rock, so here, tell me what you think. Is this going to be big?" Shit, yeah, it's going to be big. But I've also had other. I listened to that YouTube album, Octung Baby. I didn't think it was going to be that big. I was wrong.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Just a little bit. I thought that album sucked at first.
I still think it sucks.
Well, I thought it sucked for different reasons than you think it sucks. But just like I thought the Red Hot Chili Peppers weren't going to go anywhere if they kept cursing. But they had never had a problem with their cursing. They made it despite their foul language. They had some good songs. So, the music business, chews you up and spits you out. And I believe Anvil's biggest problem was management. One of those record companies that were not in it for the artist. And essentially, they got lost in the shuffle. And when you take a 4-year break, it's not good. I mean, nowadays is a different story. It's completely different.
Social media has changed everything. You can be in the public eye at all times. Exactly. Everybody pretty much is in the public eye at all times if you're a celebrity of any type. But back then, it was TV, radio, touring, things that kept you in the minds of the people. And being gone for 4 years, especially in the height of that era, that killed them.
And
then the music just hasn't been that good.
That too. So to kind of wrap this part up with a nice little bow, the biggest thing, you talk about Anvil, you brought up Keel. Let's bring up Black and Blue. That's another band that was supposed to be big. It was another Gene Simmons produced band, and they went nowhere after a couple albums. These, Lizzie Borden, they stayed with Metal Blade their entire career, but they were basically disbanded and reformed and disbanded and reformed. There's a reason why these albums, these bands don't make it, because in God's honest truth, they're not that good. They're not, like, the song, from Keel, The Right to Rock. That was a great song. Anthem, awesome. But you got to follow it up with another good anthem, not a cover of "Let's Spend the Night Together" from the Rolling Stones. Not another cover from what was that cover they did, "Because the Night."
Because the Night, yeah.
Great version, but it's not.
But don't use that as your single.
Well, you could, but you got to follow it up with a good original. And that was the problem. They had no good originals.
Yes.
Okay. Van Halen, You Really Got Me as a cover. Great version, but they had great originals. So there's the difference.
Yeah.
It's like that. There are plenty of bands who've Quiet Riot. They made it on Come On Feel the Noise, great cover, almost a duplicate of the original, but Bang Your Head, Mental Health was a good song. The album itself was great. You had something good behind it. They failed to capitalize on that, even though they had a platinum album with the second one, and they tried to do the same formula, and that was a problem. It became formulaic, which it shouldn't have been. It should have been more organic.
There's some bands that can adapt to the times and it not feel forced. When Van Halen went from the 70s into the mid 80s, when they started releasing songs like Jump, and then even with Sammy, they did Why Can't This Be Love, introducing some synths. It didn't seem like they were doing it because they were desperate to survive. They just did it because they just liked the music, and it felt natural, and they were having fun with it, and you could tell. Yeah, that's the difference. Is a lot of these bands, they were just struggling because they just didn't have it. They may have had a few good songs in them, and it just didn't work out. sometimes stuff doesn't work out.
Exactly. Sometimes stuff doesn't work out. And that's, sometimes you just don't have it, and sometimes you do. I don't, to me, the bands that make it have something. And the ones that continue to succeed have something that appeals to the people that like that music. The ones that don't succeed, yeah, you may have had one hit, but you weren't able to follow it up. And that's the big thing. All right, so that's the three main topics that I wanted to get off my chest. I don't think you have anything else per se, or was there something you wanted to beef about?
No, I think I'm ready to get into the big four.
All right, so we're into the big four. This week's big four, it goes all the way back to the first topic. This is the big four bands not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for one reason or another. They haven't gotten their participation trophy yet, or they haven't been inducted. So, why don't you go first? I think I went first last time.
Okay. All right, so my number 4 is Motorhead. I kind of mentioned them earlier, but Motorhead is a band that has been influential on so many different artists. So many have said that Lemmy was their inspiration for getting into music. They're a band that has won 1 Grammy. They've been nominated 4 times. But the big thing is just the influence they had. They were one of the bands that they weren't necessarily metal per se. At least in the eyes of Lemmy, but everyone kind of viewed him as one of the fathers of metal. So, it's a shame that they're so overlooked. My number 3 is Pantera. Pantera had a relatively short career, realistically. Sure, they had the stuff with Terry Glaze before, but it really wasn't until Cowboys from Hell when they really became an established band. 4 platinum records. One of them was a 2 times platinum. They had 1 gold record, which was their last album. Sold 20 million records worldwide. 4 Grammy nominations. Unfortunately, they never won one. But they influenced the sound of groove metal. They were pop culture at that time. They were huge. The attitude. They were metal that worked at that time period. When a lot of metal wasn't. So they're a band that I love, and I think people still love today. And there's no chance of them ever coming back, but they live on through us, so they need to be in the Hall of Fame. My number 2 is Megadeth. 6 platinum records, 1 2 time, sold 38 million records worldwide, 1 Grammy win, 12 Grammy nominations. Thrash musicians cite Dave as the godfather of thrash. His early work with Metallica is super important in establishing the sound of thrash. He's continued on all these years, being, a metal guy, and he's important in the genre of thrash metal as well as metal in general. So many people use him as a inspiration, a reference of getting into music. Amazing songwriter, kind of brought on a more technical aspect than some of his contemporaries, and definitely deserves to be in the Hall of Fame. My number 1 is Iron Maiden. 5-time platinum record. And I'm using U.S. counts. Obviously, there's the others in the other countries, but we're from the U.S. and that's kind of what we're basing it on. And the Hall of Fame is, I guess, based out of here, sadly, not a good representative of our country. Technically, they have 6 platinum albums if you include Live After Death. 1 Grammy win with I believe it was Blood Brothers.
I love that song.
4 Grammy nominations. They've influenced so many bands. There would not be a lot of metal music without the inspiration of Iron Maiden. They're one of my favorite bands, period. And it may be a little bit of bias on my part, but I don't think so. I think they've been a subsisting band, and they've only gotten better with age. Sure, they've gone through 3, I guess technically 4 different eras, but 3 singers, and they continue to put out amazing music, and they're still such an influence on the genre, they got to be in the Hall of Fame. Period.
I agree. So I was going to laugh because when you said many people use Dave reference as Dave Mustaine as a influence, and you said reference shortly thereafter. I just imagine someone going, "Yeah, I know Dave Mustaine. You think you can get
He's my reference?
He's my reference. Good job." All right,
funny.
so you're showing here your references are your mom, your dad, Dave Mustaine.
They call Dave, and he's like, he sucks.
I don't know anything about that guy. All right.
Are you sure his last name's Mustaine? No, I don't know that guy.
He's my son. All right. All right. So for me, we have one crossover out of this one. I had three other artists that I chose, and I chose for different reasons. So my number 4 is the Runaways, which the Runaways included Cherry Curry, Lita Ford, and Joan Jett, among two other musicians that were part of the band. The original five lady members. After their third album, it was only 4. Cherry Curry left, and Joan Jett became the main lead singer for the band. I mean, their influence is felt every day by every woman who plays rock and roll. Lita Ford still plays to this day. Cherry Curry still plays to this day. Joan Jett still plays. She's the opening act for the stadium tour with Motley Crue, Def Leppard. Lita Ford is doing her own thing. So, they were a huge influence for a lot of women in the 70s and 80s. They had a lot of things go wrong with their career, and they, when they split up, they had their individual successes. As everyone knows, Joan and Lita, but I think they were very influential in regards to female rockers, and that's definitely something worthy of being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for. Number 3 for me is Korn. Many people may say that they're not metal, but obviously they are the people who have been given the distinguished label of being the starters or the grandfathers or the people who started nu metal. They have had a very long and successful career. I give them that much. But I believe they should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for that reason. You're starting a whole subgenre of metal. Kind of puts you there in one of the top influential bands in the scene today. For me, number 2. Now this guy's already in the Hall of Fame, but he's not in the Hall of Fame as a solo artist. And many people would say that his solo career was bigger than his band career, has definitely lasted longer. And I'm talking about Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy has, obviously you're a fan, I'm a fan. Ozzy's solo career has been basically based on the guy playing 6-string guitar for him. Randy was huge. Jakey Lee was huge. Zakk Wylde was huge. Those are the 3 biggest guitar players that Ozzy's played with. And each of them have had a huge influence on Ozzy himself and the music that they've put out, as well as an influence on the guitar players that play that music. So for that reason, I believe Ozzy as a solo artist should be in the Hall of Fame. And number 1 is the same as your number 1. Iron Maiden, without a doubt, needs to be in the Hall of Fame. They continue to this day to sell out stadiums worldwide. Every place they go to, they sell out stadiums worldwide, except the United States, which might be the issue. They do still do well in the United States, but they don't do as well as they do in South America, in the UK, in Europe, in Australia, every other country in the world, they are without a doubt a stadium band. But in the United States, it's a little different. But they definitely deserve it. Besides all the accolades that you mentioned, Chris, with the six and 7 platinum albums, just the awards have been just endless for them over the years, and they continue to put out great music. They continue to influence new bands to this day, and that's all you can sit there and say. They have one of the best shows in concerts, hands down. They always are entertaining the fans, and that's their main goal is their fans, to entertain and to make their fans happy. And I think they achieve that every single time.
They do. Their concerts are amazing. And like I said, they keep putting out better and better music, and it's just sad. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is just absolutely clueless, and until they have a clue or buy a clue or phone a friend or something, it's going to continue to be that way. Well, that's our big 4 bands not in the Hall of Fame, and that brings a close to this episode of Debating Metal. So, like always, don't forget to tell your friends about us and subscribe and follow. And don't forget, you can interact with us by commenting on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or you can send us a DM as well. If you listen to us on YouTube, be sure to leave us a comment, or if you want, send us an email to debatingmetal@gmail.com. And remember to tune into the next episode where we spark up another exciting metal debate. On behalf of Kenneth and myself, stay safe, and always turn it up to 11.
See ya.